Thanks for stopping by another Drive Time Dialectic. I'm PC, the host of Minnesota Black Robe Regiment and all of its various platforms and shows now. I mean, we've got TC and Friends Monday Night Musings on its third season. We had our third episode last night. We had the inestimable Samantha and Nathan from Bellevue, Nebraska on last night to talk about their treatment at the hands of corrupt, confused, incorrigible law enforcement officers from the Bellevue, Nebraska Police Department. We had them on last night. Friday night we had the season 3 premiere of Libertarian Lowdown, and I had Libertarian Party presidential candidate extraordinaire Mike Termott on, and I'm looking to bring some of the other presidential candidates on, along with other libertarians who are running for office and aren't running for office. So that was Friday night. I've been putting out other shows and other shorts, and I'm really thankful for everybody tuning in. For those of you that missed it, just the other day, I added in memberships now for the YouTube channel, so you can now support me directly through YouTube if you're interested. And if you are, please feel free to head on over and look at the membership button and pick one. I think the entry level, which is local. I can't remember exactly how I worded it, forgive me, but it's got to do with local activism. And the lowest level is like $4 a month. And if you prefer to go through Subscribestar, I have 4 levels there as well. And I'd love to have, support here on YouTube or support over on Subscribestar, because I am looking at trying to get some new equipment. And I'm trying to do all of that strictly through income through YouTube and Subscribestar. So if you are interested and you would like to do that, I would be very grateful. And if you just like, hey, I can't afford or can't commit to a monthly thing, and you want to do super chats or super thank yous, whether you're watching this back on replay or you want to send a super chat to say mean and nasty things about me, that I'll read on air, because I read all my super chats on air, no matter how terrible they are. If you want to say something terrible about me, that'll probably move you to the top of the line, unless somebody comes in with a much bigger super chat and it's nice about me, then yours will get read, but not kept up as long as the nice ones, because I'm vainglorious and I love to promote myself and only have nice things said about me, which is really strange considering what I've chosen to do with my downtime, which is talk about politics and the sad state of affairs that has become the United States Republic. And boy, I just have to give you this little story before I launch into my breakdown of House File 4300 here in the state of Minnesota. But we're gonna start with. So some of you know that the city that I live in, the city of Spring Valley, Minnesota, very ineptly posted a status on their Facebook page. Which, by the way, I'm back on Facebook, fans and friends and haters and hate watchers and Minnesota BCA and FBI decide to watch me. So now you've got another place to go and track me down. But their Facebook page, they posted a reminder right away. No, you haven't missed much. The People Actual Liberty of events. You're a new one. I haven't seen you comment before. I pretty much just got started. But anyway, the city of Spring Valley posted reminder. You're not allowed to have your grass longer than 10 or 6 inches. And somebody said, what about no mow May? And they said, Spring Valley does not observe no mow May. And that's resulted in a bunch of comments. And then someone posted and very astutely said, well, just get goats. and someone else very astutely said, they're not going to allow that. Because, as you know, you have to have a permit to have a dog or a cat. And this person said, well, another person says, show me where I need permission to have a dog or cat in the city of Spring Valley. And this other individual went ahead and showed them, You have to have a permit. It's $25 per dog, $25 per cat. Sounds like permission to me. And this person said, that's not permission, it's a permit. Folks, this is why we can't have a nice republic. This is right here. Because some moron out there is drawing a distinction between permit and permission. But anyway, I digress. Well, not really, because one of the reasons I want to talk to you folks, whether you're in Minnesota or not, this is really important, and I really want you guys to be paying attention to your own state legislature, whether it be full of Republicans, majority Republican, or whether it's full of Democrats, being just the prog left Democrats or conic Republicans. You guys need to be really paying attention to firearms legislation, because by and large, the sum total of Republicans love firearms legislation. They absolutely do love firearms legislation. It's irrefutable. And the reason that I say that is because they're always the ones that are out there talking about common sense gun control, common sense firearms legislation. We just need common sense. I'm changing glasses because it's getting dark and I can't really read much, right? I can read, those are prescription sunglasses, but I can't read very well on the screen with it. But you can argue with me all day long, but the vast majority of Republicans will always opt into common sense firearms control. And so when I look at what's happening in Minnesota and I kind of extrapolate and then apply that across the country, Minnesota is on the verge of having a new safe storage law. And the link to Minnesota House File 4300 is in the description of this video. I would strongly encourage anybody in Minnesota and even outside of Minnesota to go look at this, because this is absolutely terrifying. Not on its face, because it sounds like, oh, it's common sense. But they go to define what is a gun safe, what's a gun room, what can be used as a gun room, where guns have to be stored, ammo has to be stored, how it has to be stored. It goes so far as to say that, yeah, you can't get in trouble if you have your firearm on you and directly in your control at all times, or on your nightstand or under your pillow if you want. And I'm paraphrasing, or not paraphrasing, but mocking a little bit. But of course, this sounds like darling legislation of the prog left, and to some degree it is. The prog left does want as much control of your firearms as possible. The problem that we're facing is that within that legislation, it makes exceptions. It gives an exemption to law enforcement, right? So that if you're a law enforcement officer in your home, you're exempt from obeying this rule. If I'm reading it correctly, and I would love for others to go and read the legislation. Once again, it's linked in the description of this video. You should be able to find it on Facebook, X, which I call Twix, and on YouTube. But basically, law enforcement, surprise, surprise, is exempt. And then it goes through in the details who's in violation, what those violations might be, what level those violations will be at, and even prescribes penalties by linking to penalties for similar crimes and under other laws that have been codified in the state of Minnesota, ordinances, statutes, whatnot. And what they never talk about is enforcement. Now, the problem with enforcement it has risen up in Minnesota. The Minnesota Sheriff's Association did write a strongly worded letter saying we need some nuance here. We need to know what enforcement's going to look like. Now, notice the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, and I'm, of course, paraphrasing a much longer letter, because no elected person who then serves in an elected position on a board of elected people can ever say anything short and sweet, like, we're not going to enforce safe storage rules, which every single law enforcement agency should say, you could pass all the laws you want when it comes to firearms, we're not going to enforce them, especially safe storage laws, which make it virtually impossible for people with children to defend their homes. There's no other way around it. So you can have your gun, but you can't defend your house too. Yeah, it's just the way it is. And as the sheriff said, we need clarification, we need some nuance. Not one point there did it ever say we will not enforce this if you don't give us the clarification, if you don't give us the nuance that we're looking for. That should be a red flag. Ironically, that should be a red flag to everyone that they didn't say that they would not enforce safe storage laws. What's missing in the safe storage law legislation, House File 4300, is how one can be found in violation. Now, it seems pretty simple. If you're not storing your firearm in a safe way, according to this law, you're in violation, right? Just like driving without a seatbelt, driving distracted is a violation. But it's clear when you are in violation, and it's clear how those things are enforced. Distracted driving, not wearing a seatbelt, as you can hear in the background. Those are observable. Those are enforceable. And they're out in public and they're very easy to see. However, with safe storage laws, there's no easily enforceable manner to apply that to the legislation when it's passed. And make no mistake, folks, safe storage laws passed in the state of Minnesota. And they will eventually come to your state. And Republicans will fight it on some level. They'll try to put nuance in. They'll try to come up with ways to soften it. But they will take part in writing or amending or changing it. But they're never going to get safe storage laws gotten rid of, because almost every state has some form of safe storage legislation. And for any of that to pass, in any state, there's got to be Republicans on board with it. There just has to be. It's the same with permitting for permit to carry concealed, however you want to say it. All of those are violations of the Second Amendment, of the natural right of man to keep and bear arms. But Republicans will find ways to say, well, we've got to do something, so we're going to give them this. And I'm not saying there aren't Republicans out there fighting against safe storage laws. You know, a good friend who I scrap with at times, Walter Hudson, is in the Minnesota House, and he's doing his level best to advise people. Shane Mecklen is doing his level best to advise people and saying, look, hey, we're fighting this, and it's going to pass whether Republicans support it or not. But ultimately, there's compromise that leads to all of this, and every state's going to have safe storage legislation, just like almost every state's going to end up with red flag legislation, PURPOs, and extreme risk protection orders. And every law enforcement agency will agree to enforce all of it, all the time. And that brings me to what I was saying already. How are these enforceable? Look, if this is a situation inside of your home, there's no way for them to know whether or not you have a firearm that's stored safely or not, until such a time as a child is injured or wounded, or an unauthorized or unpermitted person is injured or wounded. And then, of course, that's reportable because this person is injured, this person is wounded, and heaven forbid this person is unalived. And so then you can be charged in that situation. Or if your firearms are stolen, that will also allow you to be charged with a crime under the safe storage legislation in Minnesota and whatever other states are looking at doing the same thing. Safe storage legislation will criminalize you for being victimized in a burglary or in a robbery. Just let that sink in. There's no way around it. You will be criminalized for being a victim. Now, here's the other problem. If this is unenforceable until a serious situation has taken place, until a crime has been committed against you, and then now you are going to be criminalized for being the victim of a crime, or somebody does something and a child or someone else is hurt through having access to the firearm, If that's the only way that you can be charged, how do they plan on enforcing this? And what I'm going to tell you is that this is paving the way for mandatory firearms registration in Minnesota and other states that are enacting this legislation. I don't see how you can think your way around this. There's no other way. There's no other way at all for them to enforce without mandatory registration. And then with mandatory registration of firearms, they will give you permission to have your firearms, but you have to prove your safe storage. And like many other things, you will be required at some point to open up your home to prove that you are continuing to maintain a safe storage situation for those firearms. There's no other way to make this enforceable. People can argue with me about this all day long, but there's no other way around it at all. There's no way around it. And it's only enforceable if law enforcement is willing to enforce it. That's it. You can pass all the laws in the world. You can codify whatever you want. You can do whatever you want with statutes, ordinances, and any of that. The only way anything is enforceable is if law enforcement says we will enforce it. And so what safe storage laws in my state of Minnesota and in your state, wherever you might be from, will end up doing is it will end up leading to tracking who has firearms. And so even if you're grandfathered in, don't drive distracted, by the way. So even if you're grandfathered in most states now, ammunition purchases are tracked. I know that a lot of people think I'm crazy, but it's true. You can't buy ammunition without ID now. You tell me in the state of Minnesota where you can go and buy ammunition in most approved places without buying it from your buddy, which they're going to work on controlling too if they haven't already. If you go to buy ammunition, they will ask you for ID to buy ammunition. That's easily trackable. So let's say now they decide they're going to start tracking every single person who buys ID or ammo. They're going to say, oh, well, this person bought ammo for X caliber firearm for whatever gauge or shotgun. Well, they must have a firearm in their home. Now we have cause to show up and request to be allowed into the home under House File 4300, which has now been made law, which it hasn't quite yet in Minnesota. It's coming. It will happen. But so they show up and they say, we'd like to come in and make sure that you're abiding by safe storage laws. And you say, no, I'm not going to let you in. Well, we know for a fact you have firearms. Okay, so why won't you let us in to search your home or check to make sure that you're abiding by safe storage legislation? Well, let's not even call it a search. And you say, well, I'm sorry, officer, I don't answer questions and you're not allowed in my home. Oh, well, that sounds pretty shady. And what we have seen time and time again is that within the state of Minnesota and all over the United States, law enforcement loves to say things like, well, that's suspicious. We need to investigate that. So then they toddle on off and they go and they get a warrant. What's that warrant for? You're not showing that you're storing firearms safely. And we know for a fact that you have firearms, and your failure to comply is a red flag to us. So we're going to go and we're going to get it to make sure. And this sounds extreme, folks. I know it sounds absolutely ridiculous to people who don't think about these things on a regular basis. But that's where we're headed, folks. In the state of Minnesota, we just passed ERPO legislation, and it just went into effect in the last year. Red flag laws just went into effect in Minnesota last year. I can think of no sheriff. I can think of no chief of police. I can think of no law enforcement agency in the state of Minnesota that said, we will not take part in enforcing ERPOs. In fact, the vast majority that I can find any statement from all said these are wonderful tools in the hands of law enforcement. We need these tools to keep people safe from themselves and from harming others. Statistically, we know that red flag legislation prevents no one from committing suicide. No one. And so far, we can't find any statistics that say extreme risk protection orders, that red flag legislation, has prevented any murders. They haven't prevented any mass homicides. And in fact, in one case, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting, the person should have been arrested when he shot up that school, and he wasn't. And they had legal grounds to do it because he was making threats. So when we start to look at the track record, when we start to look at how politicians work together and they scheme together and they compromise to find a good balance, the only time any of that does anything, or all that ever does, is hurt us. To name one situation where one piece of firearms legislation has made anybody safer. I'll wait. I might get a little spotty reception here in just a second, but I'll wait. You show me where one piece of firearms legislation has made one person in the United States safer. Name one. If you say not allowing felons to own firearms, has that made anyone safer? It hasn't, because we keep finding out that felons are getting firearms all the time, right? It's happening. So as we look at, say, as we look at things like red flag laws, ERBOs, we have to really start to ask ourselves what's going on here and why. And who's going to be responsible for seeing to these things being enforced, and what are going to be the parameters and the ramifications of enforcement. And we're really only left with a couple of options. Therefore, it's a worthless law. Sorry about that, folks. I knew I was going to get spotty here for a second. So we're left with the option that the law, the House File 4300, when it's passed into law, will be worthless because it's going to be unenforceable, or all it's doing, and it's there again, the same for every state looking at safe storage legislation, and there's numerous states, numerous municipalities that are looking at safe storage legislation. If they can't get their state to do it, the counties are looking at it. If they can't get the counties to do it, then the municipalities are going to do it. And as you look at these things, all it's doing is it's either a law with no teeth, or it's paving the way to completely strip you of your firearms and having them in your home the way you want to have them. And I'm not advocating for leaving a loaded gun in the reach of a toddler or someone who's not been taught how to handle that firearm. I'm not advocating for that. Like, anybody that's got a handgun has done something stupid before. Like, we've all done something stupid with it. You've set it down and not thought about it and walked away and like, oh crap, where did I set it down? In your own home, not in public. But we've all done that. And that's a wake-up call. We feel that initial jolt of shock and shame when that happens. Like, oh crap, where did I put it? I sure hope, but if we're reasonable and responsible people, we're instructing our loved ones, our kids, our grandkids, whatever. This is a firearm. This is just a tool. It's not going to hurt you, but you are not allowed to touch it or handle it without grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or aunt or uncle, whoever it is, being there and helping you. That's how we make people safe. That's how we do it. That's how we make our kids and our grandkids and our great grandkids and our nieces and nephews and on and on and on. That's how we make kids safe. We teach them to respect the firearm. We don't lock it away in a closet like it's a dangerous criminal in and of itself, in a confined room that only the right people can have access to it. I mean, what this is imprisoning an inanimate object in such a way so as to condition people to be terrified of it. And the more terrified people are of these tools, the more likely they are to be compliant when this legislation is used to pave the way to strip you of even more of your liberty. And there again, I challenge anyone who's watching or who watches this back on replay or listens into what I'm saying to show me where I'm wrong. Show me how I'm wrong. Because I'm not. I'm not wrong on this. And this is opening the door for massive law enforcement abuse. Massive law enforcement abuse. And I'm glad to see the more Ron Paul type Republicans who are more paleo libertarian types starting to come alive and say, like, every law that you pass, you're giving law enforcement more tools to oppress you. And that's what the reality of it is. That's why the letter from the Minnesota Sheriff's Association didn't say we won't enforce these laws. It said we need nuance about what it's going to look like to enforce these laws. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. It's just a terrible place for us to find ourselves. So if you are in Minnesota and you want to make an impact on this legislation, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to your House of Representatives rep, reach out to your senator, and say, if you do not adamantly stand up and oppose this, we're coming for you in the next election. If they won't do that, if they will not publicly come out against this, and this is what's happening, they're being told, you hate children, you hate children, you hate children, you want children to die, you want poor children to be gunned down in their own homes by irresponsible parents who are leaving their firearms laying all over the place. And what we know is that that's not happening. It's just not happening. People are not leaving their guns lay around for their kids to just randomly pick them up. But we're not hearing. Does it happen? Hell yes, it happens. But guess what? Like almost every year, you hear a story about a hunter who leans his shotgun or his rifle against a fence, and he climbs it, and the dog runs up and jumps on it and hits the trigger with his paw. Or they set it against a barbed wire fence, and they go to pull it up, and it snags against the barbed wire, and they shoot themselves. I mean, we hear this stuff constantly. It happens. There's no way around it. Yes, it happens, but you do not make anyone safer by making everyone less safe. It's impossible. People have got to wake up and recognize that. But the problem is that Republicans cave to the emotionalism of safety almost all the time. There again, we got guys like Walt and Shane that are up there fighting against this stuff. But there's somebody who's going to start to talk about, well, we got to come up with some reasonable compromise here. Because this is going to pass, so we have to come up with some reasonable compromise. And what I want something in the legislation that promises there will never be gun registration in the United States. I want somebody to put that in the legislation, in the model legislation, this House File 4300. I want somebody to put that in. We promise that this legislation will forbid any use of firearms registration or tracking of firearms registration based on ammunition purchases. And then just once, I would love to hear somebody who takes an oath to defend the Republic, to defend the Constitution of the United States, who wears a badge and a uniform, stand up and say, my agency, as long as I am elected to serve, as long as I'm appointed to serve in this agency, I will not allow anyone in my agency to enforce this legislation, no matter how it's written. One time, folks. I want that. Just one time. I want, and I want all of my Republican friends, I want all of my GOP friends to look at this back to blue mentality that at all costs, back to blue at all costs mentality that they have. I want them all to look at that mentality that they have, and then look at the cops, look at the police that they back, no matter what. And I want them to ask themselves, why are no cops that we know coming out and screaming bloody murder about any of this gun control? Right? And tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. I hear all the time about constitutional sheriffs and sheriffs who love and enforce the Constitution. Not one sheriff in Minnesota says they will not enforce this legislation that I can find. If you know of one, please send me a message on Facebook. Send me a message on Twix. Send me a message. Comment on this video on YouTube. Please, just one time. Show me one sheriff. Show me one chief of police. Show me one deputy. One street cop. Show me one. Show me one that says they will not enforce it. Show me one one DA who says, I will not enforce this. I don't care who passes it. I won't enforce it. Show me one. Oh, wait. I hate to say it, but you're not going to find them. I just don't think you're going to find them. And if you do, I will eat crow and gladly admit I was wrong. So, folks, I'm going to wrap it up here. My drive time dialectics always run about this long, and that's about it. I'm going to go hit the treadmill because I am working on getting back the body of a 20-year-old at the age of 53. The problem is to get the body of a 20-year-old, you got to be able to outrun them. But so I'm going to go work out for a while, hit the treadmill a little bit while it's still not quite warm enough for me to be going outside to work out. Folks, if you haven't yet, go back and like this video, comment on the video, share the video. If you're interested, hit a membership level here or a membership level on Subscribestar. Share the video out, and then also go and watch my video, a conversation with Nathan and Samantha from Bellevue, Nebraska last night to hear they're not hardcore prog left people who have always said all cops are bastards. These are everyday people who have been abused by law enforcement, and they've said enough is enough. Enough is enough. We need massive law enforcement reform, and legislation like House File 4300 is opening the door to massive abuse of we the people by law enforcement in enforcing unconstitutional gun control legislation. And I wish more of my conservative friends would become more paleo-conservative, become paleo-libertarian in their mindset, and start to look at this. No one in government should get our blind trust. No one in government should get our support. They already get our tax dollars to pay their bills. They get our tax dollars to pay for their vacations and to put their kids through school and all of that stuff, college and all of that. That's what they get. They get no trust. No one does. In a government position. No one gets that. And until they come out and speak out against legislation like House File 4300, actively speak out against it and say they will not enforce it, they get no support and no attaboys from me. I know it's harsh. I don't feel bad. But, my friends, until next time, fight for your freedom, it is yours. Fight for your liberty, it belongs to you. And until next time, Sic Semper Tyrannis.
We are go for liftoff in T-30. Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. authorized to fire at